The metallic taste of recycled air filled Raven Mitchell's lungs as she regained consciousness. Her head throbbed, and the cold floor beneath her felt foreign, smoother than any human-made surface. As her vision cleared, the reality of her situation came into sharp focus. She was in a cage. Not a metaphorical one, but an actual prison of shimmering energy fields and crystalline bars that hummed with an otherworldly resonance. The last thing she remembered was running diagnostics on the quantum drive of her ship, the Star Weaver. As one of the few human engineers who understood both Centaurian and Proximan tech, she'd made a comfortable living in the outer colonies upgrading vessels with hybrid systems. That expertise had apparently caught someone's attention. The attack had come without warning. A massive ship had materialized from what seemed like empty space, its design unlike anything in human records. Before she could even reach for the emergency beacon, everything had gone dark. A whisper of movement caught her attention. Through the ethereal bars of her cage, she watched as a figure emerged from the shadows. The alien was tall, easily 7 feet, with skin that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue, like the surface of a dark ocean under starlight. Most striking were her eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, each one containing swirling galaxies of silver and gold. Most fascinating, the alien spoke in her native tongue, unaware that Raven could understand every word. Years of working with alien tech had required Raven to learn multiple extraterrestrial languages, including this one, ancient Novarian, thought to be dead for millennia. Such delicate features, yet the neural scans show remarkable complexity. The alien Empress, for she could be nothing else, given her bearing and the ornate living metal that flowed across her form like liquid starlight, reached through the energy field as if it wasn't there. Her fingers, long and elegant with an extra joint, traced the air inches from Raven's face. "You will make an excellent addition to my collection." Raven forced herself to stay still, to keep her breathing steady despite the rage building in her chest. She was no one specimen to be collected and displayed. But knowledge was power, and right now, her ability to understand while appearing ignorant was her only advantage. The Empress turned to address another alien, this one smaller with crystalline growths protruding from its shoulders. "Prepare the enhancement chamber. I want to begin the modifications immediately." Raven's blood ran cold, but she maintained her facade of uncomprehending docility. Modifications? Whatever they had planned, she needed to learn more before making any move. One wrong step in this alien palace could be her last. "You don't understand what's happening, do you, little one?" The Empress's voice carried a note of almost maternal indulgence. "Don't worry. Soon you'll be perfect." She reached into the cage again, this time running a finger along Raven's jawline. "Your species has such potential, buried beneath layers of evolutionary inefficiency. I'll help you realize that potential." As the Empress swept away in a shimmer of living metal and starlight, Raven began to plan. She wasn't just an engineer, she was a survivor. And if this Empress thought humans were nothing but pets to be modified and displayed, she was about to learn just how dangerous humanity could be. But first, Raven needed to understand the game she'd been thrust into. The Empress's casual discussion of modifications suggested she'd done this before. Where were the other specimens? And more importantly, what had become of them? As she watched the elegant but alien form of her captor disappear through a doorway that seemed to form from liquid metal, Raven made herself a promise: she would learn everything she could about this place and its ruler. And when the time came, she would remind these advanced beings that humanity had not survived countless challenges by being docile pets. The real question was, how long could she maintain this deception? As the enhancement chamber was being prepared, Raven knew her time to gather intelligence was limited. She needed to learn the layout of this place, understand its technology, and figure out why she'd been chosen. All while pretending to be nothing more than a fascinating but simple creature. In the distance, she could hear the Empress giving more orders, discussing something about neural pathways and genetic optimization. Raven closed her eyes, committing every word to memory. She would need every advantage she could get. 7 days had passed since Raven's capture, each one bringing new insights into the labyrinthine politics of the Empress's court. The enhancement chamber had turned out to be less immediate torture and more elaborate display case, a vast crystalline room where specimens were kept in suspended animation while being studied. Raven had avoided that fate through a combination of luck and careful acting. The Empress, who Raven had learned was called Valaris, had become intrigued by her natural adaptability. Instead of immediate modification, she had decided to study her new pet in its original state. This meant Raven had the run of the Empress's private chambers, albeit under constant surveillance. The chambers themselves were a marvel of alien engineering. Walls that shifted like liquid mercury, floors that adjusted their temperature for optimal comfort, and windows that could become transparent or opaque at will. But it was the conversations that happened within these walls that truly captured Raven's attention. "The outer colonies grow restless, your radiance," a minister reported, his crystalline form catching the light from the ever-shifting ceiling. "The humans push further into the Nexus sector with each passing cycle." Valaris reclined on her living metal throne, absently stroking Raven's hair as she listened. "Let them expand. Their primitive ships are no match for our defensive grid." She paused, considering. Though their engineering shows unexpected innovation. Raven kept her expression neutral, even as her mind raced. The Nexus sector was supposed to be empty space, or so every human star chart claimed. What were they defending out there? "There is more," the minister continued, his crystalline fragments clicking nervously. "High Commander Thalrix suggests the humans may have discovered one of the ancient gateways." The Empress's hand stilled in Raven's hair. "Impossible. The gateways have been dormant for millennia." But there was something in her voice, a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Later that night, as Valaris prepared for sleep, Raven watched her through half-lidded eyes. The Empress's confident facade had cracked, revealing glimpses of genuine concern. She paced the chamber, speaking to herself in low tones. "The gateways cannot be awakened. The protocols were lost with the architect's fall. Unless..." She glanced at Raven, then quickly looked away. "Unless they've found something we missed. These humans, their minds work differently. They see patterns where we see chaos." Raven's pulse quickened. The gateways, could they be connected to the strange energy signatures she detected before her capture? The ones that had led her to modify her quantum drive in the first place? A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. The chamber's entrance rippled, admitting a tall figure Raven hadn't seen before. Their skin was black as space itself, with points of light moving beneath the surface like stars. "Sister," the newcomer addressed Valaris, "your pet project has the council concerned." "Nexarin," Valaris acknowledged coolly. "I wasn't aware the council took interest in my personal collections." "They take interest in everything these days." Nexarin moved closer, studying Raven with eyes that seemed to pierce through her carefully constructed facade. "Especially with rumors of human advancement in the Nexus sector. Some wonder if keeping one here is wise." "Are you suggesting I cannot control a single human specimen?" Valaris's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I suggest nothing. I merely convey concerns." Nexarin's star-flecked hand reached toward Raven, but Valaris stepped between them. "The specimen is mine to study. The council can focus on containing the human expansion." After Nexarin left, Valaris returned to her pacing, but now her movements were sharp, agitated. "They fear what they don't understand," she muttered. "The council, Thalrix, all of them. They don't see the potential." Raven listened intently, fitting each new piece of information into the growing puzzle. The gateways, the council's fear of human advancement, the power struggle playing out in whispered conversations, it all pointed to something bigger than her capture. As she settled onto her cushioned sleeping platform, Raven realized she needed to adjust her plans. Simply escaping wasn't enough anymore. Whatever the Empress and her people were hiding in the Nexus sector could be vital to humanity's future. She needed to learn more about these gateways, about why her quantum drive modifications had drawn their attention. But first, she needed to survive the growing political tension surrounding her presence. Nexarin's visit had made one thing clear: not everyone in the palace shared the Empress's fascination with human potential. Some saw her as a threat, and perhaps, Raven thought with grim satisfaction, they were right to be afraid. The attack came without warning. Raven was awakened by the sound of shattering crystal and the acrid smell of burning metal. Through the chamber's morphing walls, she could see flashes of energy weapons and hear the distinctive sound of palace guards rushing to battle stations. Villaris burst into the room, her usual graceful composure replaced by cold fury. Her living metal armor writhed across her skin like angry serpents, and all three of her eyes blazed with internal fire. "Bring me Thalrix," she commanded to the air itself. Dead or alive. Raven maintained her carefully crafted mask of innocent confusion, but her mind was racing. The High Commander had finally made his move. For weeks, she'd listened to him arguing against the Empress's passive approach to human expansion. Now it seemed he'd decided to take matters into his own hands. "Keep close," Villaris ordered Raven, unconsciously switching to ancient Novarian. "The palace defenses are compromised." She reached out, her fingers brushing Raven's cheek with unexpected gentleness. "I will not lose you to their short-sightedness." They moved through the palace corridors, which had transformed from their usual ethereal beauty into defensive configurations. Walls thickened and weaponized, floors shifted to create tactical advantages, and ceiling panels opened to reveal automated defense systems. As they reached the Empress's secure command center, Raven finally saw what had triggered the attack. The massive viewing wall showed a battle raging in the Nexus sector. Human ships, more than should have been possible, were engaging the Empire's defense grid. And they were winning. "Impossible," one of Villaris's loyal commanders whispered. "They're using gateway signatures." "But how?" Raven fought to keep her expression neutral as she watched the battle unfold. The modifications she'd been working on before her capture, the strange energy patterns she'd detected, it all made sense now. Humanity hadn't just found the gateways, they'd figured out how to replicate their energy signatures. "Your Radiance," a crystalline aid materialized from a wall panel. "High Commander Thalrix has seized control of the lower sectors. He claims you've been compromised by human influence." Villaris laughed, but there was no humor in it. After all these cycles, he still understands nothing. She turned to the viewing wall, expanding the tactical display. The gateways were never meant to be weapons. The architects designed them as bridges, connections between civilizations. For the first time, Raven saw genuine passion in the Empress's voice. "We sealed them because we feared what we didn't understand. But humans." She glanced at Raven, something like admiration in her galaxy-filled eyes. "They see their true purpose." A massive explosion rocked the command center. Through the chaos, Raven caught fragments of tactical data on the displays. The human ships weren't just replicating gateway signatures, they were stabilizing them, creating permanent corridors through space. Technology that had taken the Empire millennia to build, humanity had reinvented in decades. "Your Radiance," another commander spoke urgently. "Thalrix's forces are approaching the upper levels. We need to evacuate you to the secure facility." "No." Villaris straightened, her armor flowing into more aggressive configurations. "I will not hide while they destroy everything we've built. Activate the ancestral protocols." The command center fell silent. Raven could feel the shift in energy as ancient systems, dormant for generations, began to power up. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with new life. "My Empress," one of the older advisors stepped forward. "The ancestral protocols were sealed for a reason. Once activated. I know the cost, Valaris cut him off. She turned to Raven, and for a moment, her mask of imperial authority cracked. I wonder, how much do you truly understand, little one? How much have you seen while we thought you simple? Raven's heart stopped. Had she finally been discovered? But Valaris simply smiled, a sad, knowing expression that suggested she'd known far more than she'd let on. The protocols will restore full power to all gateway systems, she announced to her commanders. Including those the humans have awakened. If Thalrix wants war, let him face the consequences of true connection. As alarms blared and the palace's defense systems engaged in full force, Raven realized she was witnessing a turning point in history. The Empress wasn't just fighting a coup, she was choosing to embrace the very change her people had feared for millennia. But as more explosion rocked the command center and Thalrix's forces drew closer, one question burned in Raven's mind: when the dust settled, would there be anything left of either civilization to connect? The ancestral protocols changed everything. As ancient systems surged to life throughout the palace, Raven watched in awe as the very architecture of the building began to transform. Walls that had once merely shifted now flowed like quicksilver, revealing layers of technology that had laid dormant for millennia. The architects never intended separation, Valaris spoke softly, her three eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of energy now visible in the air around them. Our ancestors chose isolation out of fear. We sealed the gateways, buried our greatest achievements, and called it wisdom. A holographic display materialized in the center of the command center, showing the battle raging both in space and throughout the palace. Thalrix's forces had control of the lower levels, but they were clearly unprepared for the ancestral systems. Ancient defense mechanisms activated without warning, trapping entire squadrons in temporal stasis fields. Your Radiance, one of the commanders called out, the human fleet, they're adapting to the gateway frequencies. There, he stopped, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. Raven saw it too. The human ships weren't just fighting, they were communicating with the ancient systems. Each gateway signature they generated was being recognized by the protocols as authorized access. Somehow, humanity had independently developed technology that resonated with the architect's original designs. Of course they are, Valaris smiled, and for the first time, Raven heard genuine respect in her voice. They build without the burden of our fears, our restrictive traditions. She turned to Raven, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended their supposed roles of Empress and pet. Your Radiance. A new voice cut through the tension. Nexarin materialized from a shadow portal, his star-flecked skin pulsing with urgency. Thalrix has reached the archive chamber. He's attempting to override the protocols. Valaris's expression hardened. He cannot succeed. The archives require, she stopped suddenly, looking at Raven with new intensity. Unless. Before she could finish her thought, the entire palace shuddered. Warning signals flashed across every display as power fluctuations rippled through the ancient systems. In the tactical feeds, Raven could see Thalrix's forces deploying some kind of disruption field around the archive chamber. He's trying to sever the connection to the architect's network, one of the technicians reported frantically. If he succeeds, the gateways will collapse, all of them, including the ones the humans are using. Raven knew this was the moment everything would change. The careful deception she'd maintained for weeks could no longer serve anyone. With lives on both sides hanging in the balance, it was time to reveal just how much she really understood. She stepped forward, straightening her posture and letting the mask of simple pet fall away. The archives aren't responding to his override attempts because they're already locked to a different frequency, she said in perfect ancient Novarian, her voice clear and confident. The command center fell silent. Every eye turned to her, some in shock, others in dawning comprehension. Valaris, however, showed no surprise at all. How long have you known? Raven asked the Empress directly. Since the beginning, Valaris replied, her lips curving in a slight smile. Your neural patterns were too complex for a simple specimen. But I needed to understand why the most gifted human engineer in the outer colonies would allow herself to be captured. The palace shook again as another explosion rocked the lower levels. On the tactical displays, Thalrix's forces were regrouping for a final push toward the command center. The quantum drive modifications I was working on, Raven explained quickly, they weren't just random experiments. We found fragments of architect data in old ruins. I was trying to recreate their approach to space-time manipulation when your ships appeared. And now humanity has awakened powers they don't fully understand, Nexarin interjected darkly. No, Valaris corrected him. They understand better than we do. They see what the architects truly intended, connection, not conquest. She turned to Raven. That's why you stayed, isn't it? To understand why we feared it so much? Before Raven could respond, every screen in the command center flashed red. Thalrix's voice boomed through the palace's communication systems. Your time is over, dear sister. The purity of our civilization must be preserved, even if it means destroying everything you've corrupted. In the archive chamber displays, they could see him accessing ancient weapon systems, fail-safes built by those who had first sealed the gateways. If activated, they would not only destroy the network but send devastating feedback through every connected system, including the human ships. Valaris looked at Raven, all pretense gone. You understand our technology now, perhaps better than we do. Help me stop this, and I swear on the architects themselves, we will forge a new path, together. As alarms blared and systems crashed around them, Raven faced a choice that would reshape the future of both civilizations. The question was, could she trust an Empress who had kept her as a pet, even if that Empress might be humanity's best hope for true partnership with an advanced civilization? Time seemed to freeze in the command center as Raven met Valaris's gaze. In those galaxy-filled eyes, she saw something she never expected, hope. Not the condescending amusement of a collector toward a pet, but genuine hope for a future that neither of their civilizations could achieve alone. The archive chamber's defenses are coded to pure architect frequencies, Raven said, her mind racing through calculations. That's why Thalrix can't fully access the weapon systems. But the human gateway signatures are based on the original patterns, Valaris finished. Untainted by our modifications. The palace shuddered again as another explosion rocked the foundations. On the tactical displays, Thalrix's forces had begun their final assault. They were using concentrated energy beams to cut through the ancestral defense systems. I need direct access to the archive's core systems, Raven announced. Not through the palace network, Thalrix is monitoring those channels. I need to be in the chamber itself. Nexarin stepped forward, his star-filled skin rippling with concern. That's suicide. The security fields will recognize her frequency, Valaris interrupted. Because she's human. Their gateway technology resonates with the original architect patterns. She turned to her commanders. Prepare for final defense protocols. Buy us time. The journey to the archive chamber was chaos incarnate. The palace's living metal architecture had become a battlefield, with walls transforming into weapons and corridors shifting to trap or crush invading forces. Raven and Valaris moved through it all like ghosts, guided by the Empress's intimate knowledge of her domain's secret paths. Why did you really keep me? Raven asked as they navigated a particularly treacherous section. You knew what I was from the start. Valaris didn't break stride. Because you proved something I've suspected for centuries, that isolation breeds stagnation. My people sealed themselves away from the universe, convinced our way was the only way. But humans. She glanced at Raven with something like admiration. You took our discarded dreams and built them anew. They reached the outer doors of the archive chamber just as Thalrix's voice boomed through the palace again. "The weapon is almost ready, sister. Your human pets will learn the price of touching divine technology." Inside the chamber, ancient technology pulsed with raw power. Thalrix stood at the central console, his military uniform gleaming, surrounded by loyal soldiers. The weapon systems hummed ominously, building toward catastrophic release. "Ah, the Empress and her favorite pet," he sneered. "Come to witness the preservation of our civilization's purity?" "You fool!" Valaris stepped forward, her living metal armor flowing into combat configuration. "You understand nothing of our civilization. The architects built the gateways to connect, not divide. They saw strength in unity, not isolation." Pretty words from a throne soon to be empty. Thalrix raised his hand, energy crackling between his fingers. "The weapon is already cycling. Soon, every gateway signature will carry devastating feedback. Your human allies will be reduced to cosmic dust." But Raven was already moving. While Thalrix focused on Valaris, she had reached a secondary console. Her fingers flew across the alien controls with practiced confidence. She wasn't trying to stop the weapon, she was redirecting it. "What are you doing?" Thalrix demanded, finally noticing her actions. "Stop her. You spent so long fearing human innovation," Raven spoke clearly, never taking her eyes off her work, "that you forgot to ask why our gateway signatures matched architect patterns." She entered the final sequence. "We didn't copy your technology. We rediscovered the original principles. Clean. Pure. Untainted by fear." The weapon activated, but instead of destroying the gateway network, it resonated with it. The chamber filled with blinding light as ancient systems recognized the frequencies Raven had introduced. Thalrix screamed in rage, but it was too late. Throughout the palace, throughout the entire empire, gateway signatures aligned with their original purpose. The network didn't collapse, it transformed. Barriers fell. Connections formed. The very fabric of spacetime shifted back to the architect's original vision. "The choice was never between isolation and destruction," Valaris said softly, watching as the light show faded. "It was between fear and growth." She turned to Thalrix, who stood frozen in disbelief. "Your rebellion is over, brother. The future will not be denied." In the days that followed, everything changed. The human fleet was welcomed not as invaders but as partners. The Empire's borders became gateways for cultural exchange rather than barriers to defend. And in the palace, a new council chamber was built, one where representatives of both civilizations could meet as equals. Raven stood at one of the palace's viewing windows, watching ships from a dozen worlds move freely through the restored gateway network. Behind her, she heard the familiar sound of Valaris approaching. "The council has approved your proposal," the Empress said. "Joint research teams, shared technology development, open exchange of knowledge." "And the specimens?" Raven asked pointedly. "Your collection?" Valaris's lips curved in a smile. "Released, with full diplomatic status. Though I hope my favorite engineer might consider staying, not as a pet, but as an advisor. We have much to learn from each other." Raven turned back to the window, watching as another gateway flickered to life, connecting worlds that had been separated for millennia. "We do," she agreed. "And this time, we'll do it together." Above them, the palace's living metal architecture shimmered with new purpose, its ancestral systems now fully awakened and integrated with human innovation. The age of isolation was over. The true golden age, one of connection, cooperation, and shared discovery, had finally begun.